LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the June 4th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out the weekend's 14 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, fair use media criticism and political analysis show for you all tonight. I'll start with some political comedy from the monologue on Real Time with Bill Maher last Friday. But as usual, my clips come mostly from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. You can see the two big topics I'm covering listed down in the video description. If you're watching as a recorded show, I'll put time indexes down there so you can skip from the climate change topic over to the Russia Covfefe or the Comey testimony and Russia coverage. And it's about 8 clips on climate change and 6 clips on the Russia scandal, which is ongoing and should be a big story this week. Climate change may be the biggest story for the future, but Comey's testimony and the Russia scandal will probably be the biggest story in the coming week. Of course, there was also the attack in London on London Bridge and the Borough Market over the weekend, and that took up a lot of news coverage. I'm not going to cover that, not just because YouTube won't monetize my videos when I talk about terrorist attacks, but also because I don't think I have that much to add other than to give, my thoughts and condolences to the people of London and the UK. I know I have a significant number of viewers in the UK, including some people who I correspond with on Twitter and other social media, so I hope they're all okay and that they're keeping calm and carrying on, which is what I'm doing with my show after this third terrorist attack in the UK in the last 3 months. And so I'm not ashamed to start with a little political comedy. This is actually talking about what may be the big story for future generations, and that's also my poll question for the week. Over in the corner here, you can click on the poll question if you want to talk about whether future generations whether future generations will condemn Donald Trump for pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord, and some gallows humor about that from Bill Maher, who's always been a big advocate of fighting climate change. And I'll talk a little bit more about Bill Maher and his monologue, and also some of the ways that, or the big way Bill Maher got in trouble this week later in the show, after we watched that clip from the monologue this morning, or not this morning, last Friday over here.
Big news, America's long nightmare as the world leaders is coming to an end. The clown who runs our country, the laughingstock on the world stage that is Donald Trump, pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord this week, as you know. I know. How brave of you. A meek. Anyway. I still have faith in liberals. Anyway, yeah, isn't that sad? I feel like I'm binge watching the fall of the Roman Empire set to the music from Benny Hill. I usually wake up to the sounds of birds chirping. I opened my window today. A sparrow went, "Fuck you." I mean, it is hard to exaggerate how alone America is on this issue. 190 countries in the world signed on to the Paris Accord. That's pretty much all of them. North Korea signed. Really, the country that is always threatening to blow up the planet wants to save the planet. Not just every country. Corporations, greedy fucking corporations are for this. ExxonMobil is for this. The CEO of General Electric said he was very disappointed, which hurt Trump because he thinks he's a general.
So that was Bill Maher's gallows humor in his monologue about the sad fact that Donald Trump is moving us backwards on the fight against climate change, and I'm going to show several clips on that. I'm not going to show the most infamous clip from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher last Friday in his interview with Senator Ben Sasse, where he used the N-word to talk about why he was a House N-word. He was not going to go work in the fields in Nebraska because it was like it wasn't on any of the topics I cover, and but I actually am thinking of making a separate video on Bill Maher, Kathy Griffin, and free speech that will talk about that and why I think people should have the right to say the N-word, even though I'm saying N-word instead of the actual word, and I could explain all that. But it's really off topic for the two big news stories that I'm covering on my Sunday Clip Roundup this week. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention, if you want to follow along as to the 14 clips I'm using, I have a clip list. There's a link down in the video description where you can look at this clip list, and you may be able to understand my notes. You should at least be able to understand who's speaking in each clip and what the topic is and generally what they're talking about. So I showed the making fun of Donald Trump pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement, and it's not really that funny. And one of the big topics on the Sunday morning news analysis shows was whether Donald Trump has gotten to the point where he actually admits the science, the facts behind man-made climate change, which is not really that controversial in the scientific community. I don't want to go into all of that, although, like I said, there's a poll question over here where you can say that climate change is a hoax or overblown. That's like the second answer. If you think that Trump was right with what he's done, then I guess you could go for the second answer in my poll that I put up in the corner for you to click on. But I think you can see that they were trying to spin it both ways. The Trump administration officials, both Scott Pruitt and Nikki Haley, were on the Sunday morning news analysis shows, and the most they would say was that Donald Trump believes the climate is changing and that human pollutants are a factor, but that's not really admitting hardly anything. And it doesn't really counteract the clips of Trump during the campaign saying that climate change is a hoax, which the first clip I want to show is from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where George Stephanopoulos confronted EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt on several clips of Donald Trump saying climate change is a hoax. And you'll see Scott Pruitt did a whole bunch of non-denial denials. And I'll compare what George Stephanopoulos did on This Week with some of the other interviewers after we watch that clip together here.
Obama's talking about all of this with the global warming and that, and a lot of it's a hoax. It's a hoax. I mean, it's a money-making industry, okay?
I'm not a believer in global warming. I'm not a believer in man-made global warming. I believe there's weather. I believe there's change, and I believe it goes up, and it goes down, and it goes up again. But I am not a believer, and we have much bigger problems.
There was President Trump during the presidential campaign, setting the stage for that dramatic decision this week to exit the Paris Climate Accords. And we're joined now by one of his top advisors on that, the EPA Administrator, Scott Pruitt. Mr. Pruitt, thank you for joining us this morning. So we just played those clips from the president back in 2015 during the campaign. Is it fair to assume that is still the president's belief?
I think the president made it clear in that statement that the climate changes. And I think what needs to be emphasized here, George, is that our focus with respect to the Paris Accord was about the agreement, the efficacy of the agreement as it relates to the environment, how it impacts the economy. The president said on Thursday that engagement internationally is something that's going to continue. But what Paris represents is a bad deal for this country, and as such, we need to exit.
But doesn't it matter whether or not the president believes there's man-made climate change, whether he believes it's a hoax? That's the predicate for the entire decision.
With respect to the Paris Accord, the focus is on the efficacy, the merits of the deal, and the demerits of the deal. The president indicated very clearly that engagement by this country internationally is going to continue. As you know, George, we are part of the UNFCCC. That's a treaty that was ratified in the early 1990s. We have shown leadership, actually substantial leadership as a country with respect to our CO2 reductions. We're at pre-1994 levels today with respect to our CO2 reductions. In fact, we're there before the Paris Accord was ever executed by this country. And when you look at the years from 2000 to 2014, we reduced CO2 emissions by over 18%. So we're leading by example. I mean, as I indicated late last week, and as the president indicated in his speech as well, we are leading with action, not words. And when you look at Paris, frankly, when you look at what was supposed to be achieved there by other nations across the globe, it was very little. It was criticized by the environmental left. The head of James Hansen, who was a NASA scientist, called it a fake and a fraud.
But, sir, it's a pretty simple question. Why can't the president just say whether or not he believes in man-made climate change? You speak for the president. You're the EPA administrator. Do you know what the president believes?
Well, frankly, George, I think the whole question is an effort to get it off the point and the issue of whether Paris was good for this country or not. And the president has indicated the climate changes.
Well, a lot of that depends on whether or not climate change is man-made.
But, George, what matters is what you do about it. What matters is what steps you take to address CO2 reductions. And what matters when you look at Paris is that China and India didn't take any steps while this country did. And the environmental left has a very short memory. When Paris was executed by this country, they criticized the agreement. It said that it did not hold China and India accountable. And at the same time, we're reducing our CO2 footprint substantially.
I want to move on, but just very simply, do you know if President Trump still believes that climate change is a hoax?
Our discussion, George, has been about the agreement, the efficacy of the agreement. That's where we spent the last several weeks focused upon the merits and demerits of the Paris Agreement. He put America first. He said that he's going to put jobs and the environment first, by the way, by making the decision that he said on Thursday.
As you know, you've received a lot of backlash in the business.
So you can see EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt there totally dodged the question, never really answered whether Donald Trump believes that man-made climate change is, man-made sources are responsible for climate change. He just believes the climate is changing, which is, there's weather, is what he said in those clips at the beginning, and that's not much of an admission, and that human pollutants are a factor. That's pretty much as far as Scott Pruitt would go on any of these shows. I actually thought the way Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday questioned him was a little better, because it sort of started in the original question with presuming the answer that Scott Pruitt was going to give, that, we're focused on the merits and the demerits of the Paris Agreement, not on whether, man-made climate change is real. And that's how he deflected the question from George Stephanopoulos in that last clip. And you'll see Chris Wallace in this next clip tries to stop that, but doesn't get much more of an answer, although he does show that Scott Pruitt is avoiding won't answer whether he's actually talked to Donald Trump in the past several months about whether man-made climate change is real or not. He won't answer that question, and Chris Wallace does, I think, a good job of emphasizing that in this next clip.
With a question that you were asked repeatedly on Friday. Here it is.
Yes or no, does the president believe that climate change is real and a threat to the United States?
Does the president believe today that climate change is a hoax?
What's interesting about all the discussions we had through the last several weeks have been focused on one singular issue. Is Paris good or not for this country?
Let me get this straight. You and the president spent weeks discussing whether he should pull out of the Paris climate deal, and you never discussed climate change?
It was about the merits and demerits of the deal, Chris.
But
so
part
that's
of that
absolutely
is
the focus. That's absolutely the focus. Look, when you look at what this country has achieved since the late 1990s, 2000 time frame, we've seen an 18% reduction in our CO2 footprint from 2000 to 2014. We're at pre-1994 levels. What's interesting about all this criticism from the left, the environmental left, is if you go back to the time that the Paris deal was cut, those same groups, in fact, James Hansen, former national scientist, called it a fake and a fraud. The general counsel of the Sierra Club was critical of what was achieved in Paris because it didn't hold China, it did not hold India accountable, and the United States agreed to 26 to 28% reductions
we're going to get
in its GHG. But that's been the focus.
Sir, we're going to get into all of that, but what I'm asking you is, as the president's EPA administrator, as his point person on the environment, isn't that a conversation that over the last few months you have to have, whether or not climate change is real or a hoax, as the president suggested, and whether or not human activity contributes to it? Are you saying you've never had that conversation with him?
The focus of the last several weeks
was
centered on the merits and demerits of the Paris Agreement.
Have you ever had a conversation on climate change?
The president said actually back during the campaign that climate change occurs. I said during my confirmation process that climate change is occurring, that human activity contributes to it.
He's also said it was a hoax.
Well, Chris, the point here, and to your question, this is something over the last several weeks. The president has received much information about the impact on jobs, and also the impact on the environment. You know, we have nothing to be apologetic about as a country with respect to what we've done in reducing our CO2 footprint.
I
That's
don't want
what's
to
so
beat a dead
hypocritical.
horse here, but you're not going to tell me whether or not the president believes climate change is a hoax and whether or not human activity. It's a simple question.
The president has indicated that climate changes. It's always changing. I've indicated the same.
Well, that's just saying
what's important, Chris, here, what's important is what the president did on Thursday was put America first and say to the United States and say to the world that we're going to remain engaged, but we're also going to make sure that as we remain engaged, we put America's interests first.
As you pointed out, the president justified pulling.
So that was a good job by Chris Wallace, I think, trying to point out the ridiculousness of how the EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt could claim that this is all about the merits and demerits of the Paris Agreement, but how can you do that kind of cost-benefit analysis if you haven't talked about whether the threat of man-made climate change is real? Because there are a lot of really nasty effects. I'm going to show Al Gore in a few minutes talk about how it's something out of the book of Revelation, and he has a lot of really good sound bites on that. Not that I don't think he delivers them that well, but before I get to the Al Gore clips, I do want to do one more comparison on Scott Pruitt. Normally I'm praising NBC for their confrontational coverage, and I'm criticizing Fox News for their biased coverage. I actually thought Chris Wallace did a good job in that last clip, especially compared to Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press, who never really tried to get Scott Pruitt to admit that man-made climate change is, a scientific fact, and instead he was really focused on this idea that the whole world is laughing at us, although he didn't even use that laughing at us quote from Donald Trump in his press conference. Instead, he said, does Donald Trump really believe that there's a worldwide conspiracy to put down the U.S. economy? And he didn't get much of an answer from Scott Pruitt. He got some of the same talking points you heard in the last two clips, but I don't think that Chuck Todd was really focusing on what was really the right issue, as I will discuss with you after we watch that clip together over here.
During your back and forth with the White House press corps, that the rest of the world wanted the United States in it to slow down the United States. Do you believe that?
Oh, I think the Paris Agreement very much so put us at an economic disadvantage.
No, I understand that. Do you believe that was the intentional, that was the motivation?
I think the rest of the world applauded what we did in Paris. And we have to go back, Chuck. And
why did they applaud it?
Because it put us in an economic disadvantage. But I think also,
Do you think this is a global, you think that the globe, that these countries got together to slow down the United States economically?
Why did China and India not have to take any steps until 2030? Why did India condition their CO2 reductions upon receiving $2.5 trillion of aid in the agreement? We were going to take steps front-loading our costs while the rest of the world waited to reduce their CO2 footprint. That's the reason it put us at a very much an economic disadvantage internationally. But Chuck, here's the deal. We have led, as I've indicated, this effort since the year 2000 with the reductions in our CO2 footprint and are at pre-1994 levels today. Not because of government mandate largely, not because of Paris, not because of Kyoto, but because of American ingenuity and innovation.
But I am just struck. You truly believe, though, that many of these countries signed on to Paris and were trying to get the United States to sign on to it for economic reasons?
If you look at the criticism that was levied against Paris when it was signed in 2015, there was as much criticism on the environmental left as there was on the right.
Sure, some thought it should have gone further.
And I'll tell you why. Because they were upset. In fact, the James Hansen, former NASA scientist, as you know, called Paris a fake and a fraud. The general counsel of the Sierra Club, contemporaneous to Paris being signed, said critical things of the agreement. The reason they said those things, Chuck, is because the rest of the world, China and India particularly, the largest polluters that we have on the planet, did not have to take any steps until after 2030, and the United States front-loaded their costs through things like the Clean Power Plan, other rules here domestically that contracted our economy. It's been estimated, as you know, it's been estimated by the Heritage Study that Paris alone would cause a contraction of $2.5 trillion of gross domestic product over 10 years.
That assumed a lot. That made up a lot of negative assumptions. That made you wanted to make assumptions that didn't anticipate job growth in other industries like solar, that the innovation would anticipate other job growth, and that would balance out. Here's what Al Gore said to me earlier when I interviewed him about this.
And I'm not going to show the clip where Chuck Todd confronts Scott Pruitt with the Al Gore clip. One of the sad things is that from the Sunday shows this morning is that Meet the Press actually cut their interview with Al Gore. He appeared on most of the shows this morning, and he was supposed to appear on Meet the Press, but because of all the London terrorist attack coverage, they cut their Al Gore interview from Meet the Press. I thought that Chuck Todd did not do that great a job of fact-checking Scott Pruitt in that last clip. Like the first 2 minutes, he let Scott Pruitt get away with all these false talking points while he was all focused on trying to get him to admit that the world did not have a conspiracy to beat down the U.S. economy, which was kind of a straw man question anyway, I guess. But then at the end, he did sort of refute the whole Heritage Foundation argument. But before I get to the Al Gore clips I promised, there's one more Trump administration official who had to answer for the whole climate change hoax idea, and that is Nikki Haley, the UN ambassador, who appeared on a couple different shows. She appeared on hold on, I dropped my clip list here. This is talking to George Stephanopoulos on talking to CNN Jake Tapper on CNN State of the Union, where I think that he used some kind of colorful language to describe Donald Trump's position that climate change is a hoax perpetrated by China. You'll see he starts off calling that nonsense, and then in his follow-up question to Nikki Haley, he actually calls it a big box of crazy. That's one of my favorite phrases from the clips this week. And you'll see Nikki Haley pretty much only admits what Scott Pruitt admitted in the most confrontational questioning, that Donald Trump believes the climate is changing and that human pollutants are a factor, which really isn't admitting anything. It's still like something that doesn't refute what he's telling his base about climate change being a hoax. And I'll talk about that with you a little more after we watch that Nikki Haley clip from CNN State of the Union this morning over here.
Say we're truth tellers. Let me show you what President Trump has tweeted about climate change. Quote, "The concept of global warming was created by and for the Chinese in order to make U.S. manufacturing non-competitive," unquote. Are you willing to acknowledge that that is nonsense?
What I will tell you is the regulations from the Paris Agreement were disadvantaging our companies. We know that. I knew that as a governor. We know that now. The jobs were not attainable as long as we had to live under those regulations. It wasn't possible to meet the conditions under the Paris Agreement had we even attempted to do that. And so I think we have to look at what's realistic. We've got a president who is going to watch out for the environment. It's what we do. It's who we are. We're going to continue to be a leader in the environment. The rest of the world wanted to tell us how to do it, and we're saying we will do it, but we'll do it under our terms.
But the standards were set by the United States for the United States. But just to be clear on this, climate change
the standards were set by the standards were set by President Obama and not passed through the Senate because the standards couldn't have been achieved.
No, but my point is, you said that the world was imposing standards on the United States. President Obama, the president of the United States at the time, is the one who set the standards. But moving that aside for 1 second, I just want to be clear on this. You're not willing to acknowledge that calling climate change a Chinese hoax is just a big box of crazy.
President Trump believes the climate is changing, and he believes pollutants are part of that equation. So that is the fact. That is where we are. That's where it stands. He knows that that it's changing. He knows that the U.S. has to be responsible with it, and that's what we're going to do. Just because we got out of a club doesn't mean that we don't care about the environment.
Let's talk about another club that we're in, NATO.
So, yeah, you see Nikki Haley there only admitting as much as Scott Pruitt would admit, as I said it before I showed the clip. But also, as I said before I showed the clip, I really like Jake Tapper's two questions there. I think he, in very few words, correctly characterized the Donald Trump position on man-made climate change as, being a hoax created by China, as both nonsense and a big box of crazy. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section as to whether that's true or not. And Al Gore, like I said before, he appeared on Meet the Press, but they didn't show the interview because of the London attack, and then on several other shows. And I want to show a few clips of him refuting what you just heard from the Trump administration. He was on these shows both because he created that movie An Inconvenient Truth, and apparently in July there's going to be a sequel called An Inconvenient Sequel, Speaking Truth to Power, or something like that. So this is his first Sunday morning interview in 17 years, as they mentioned on a couple, since the 2000 election. And this first clip is from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where George Stephanopoulos gives sort of a softball question to Al Gore, asking him, what do you think about Scott Pruitt not really saying that climate change, man-made climate change, isn't a hoax? And I think this is pretty much the best talking points that Al Gore, or the best sound bites that he gave this morning on all the shows. This is all of them concentrated together. But the thing about they used to say he was boring and wooden, and he gives these really good sound bites, but I don't think he delivers them very well, as I will discuss with you after we watch that first Al Gore clip from the Sunday morning shows this morning. Clip number 7 here.
You talk about the majority of America, people, even the majority of Republicans saying they believe in this and they want action. We've also seen this whole idea that President Trump expressed during the campaign that climate change, man-made climate change, is a hoax, really take hold among a large sector of the public. How do you explain that?
I don't think that's true among a large sector of the public. It's definitely true among a small sector. And, in Tennessee, we have a saying, if you see a turtle on top of a fence post, you can be pretty sure it didn't get there by itself. And similarly, if you see levels of climate denial in the U.S. that aren't true anywhere else in the world,
it's the first missed clip of the night. That was actually the second Al Gore clip from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. I'm going to show you in just a minute. That's about why it is that there are so many climate deniers in the United States. But the actual clip that I wanted to show you first, also from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where George asks him about Scott Pruitt denying climate change as being man-made and the whole hoax idea. And like I said, this is the talking points that are on all the other shows this morning. Clip number 6, not clip number 7. Over here.
Also has a new film in theaters in July, An Inconvenient Sequel, Truth to Power. Mr. Vice President, thank you for joining us this morning. You just heard Administrator Pruitt right there. He said whether or not the president believes in man-made climate change doesn't matter. The United States is leading by example.
Well, Administrator Pruitt has a difficult job. The administration comes off as tongue-tied and confused about the climate crisis because the truth is still inconvenient for the large carbon polluters, and they don't want to stop the polluting of the atmosphere. It interferes with their business plan. But meanwhile, we're creating jobs in this country in the solar industry at a rate 17 times faster than other jobs. The number one fastest growing job is wind power technician. The renewable energy sector and the sustainability revolution are the brightest spot for economic growth and prosperity in this country. The rest of the world is moving forward. President Trump isolated the United States with his reckless and indefensible decision, but if he won't lead, the American people will. And we're seeing governors and mayors and business leaders step forward.
So does it really make all that much difference then if the United States pulls out of the Paris Climate Accord? Remember back, the United States under George W. Bush pulled out of Kyoto, yet the innovation continued after that.
Well, we lost a lot of time when the U.S. Did not join the rest of the world community then. And while it is true that we have this sustainability revolution underway, and it's very exciting, it has the magnitude of the Industrial Revolution, but the speed of the digital revolution. But we're still not changing fast enough. Because it's not just the scientific community warning us now, it's Mother Nature. Every night on the TV news is like a nature hike through the book of Revelation. 70% of Florida is in drought right now. Missouri just declared an emergency with another one of these historic climate-related downpours. We've had 11 once-in-a-thousand-year downpours in less than 10 years in the United States. So we have to move faster. It's good news that the rest of the world is. It's good news that states and cities and businesses are. But we need presidential leadership. Since he's not going to lead, the American people are stepping up.
You lobbied the president on this, Bill.
So I thought there were a lot of really good sound bites in there. I especially like the idea that we're getting all these news reports on the weather that sound like they come from the book of Revelation, but I have to say that Al Gore, just like when he ran for president in 2000, did not have the greatest delivery. He's not the most charismatic speaker. I mean, I sympathize with that because I'm obviously not the most charismatic speaker myself, but I guess having good sound bites and good content can sometimes make up for lack of charisma. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And now I'm going to get to that next clip that I started to play by mistake before, where Al Gore tries to explain why it is we have so much climate denialism in the United States. And he talks about Citizens United, which I think is a scapegoat that doesn't really fit. And although they're the mineral extraction industry and the Koch brothers are somewhat to blame, but I think he misses one of the big factors that explain why there's so much climate denialism in the United States that I will tell you about after we watch that clip together that I started to show you by mistake before, and now I mean to show you here.
You talk about the majority of American people, even the majority of Republicans saying they believe in this and they want action. We've also seen this whole idea that President Trump expressed during the campaign that climate change, man-made climate change, is a hoax, really take hold among a large sector of the public. How do you explain that?
I don't think that's true among a large sector of the public. It's definitely true among a small sector. And, in Tennessee, we have a saying, if you see a turtle on top of a fence post, you can be pretty sure it didn't get there by itself. And similarly, if you see levels of climate denial in the U.S. that aren't true anywhere else in the world, you can be pretty sure that didn't happen by itself. The New York Times this morning traces this in part to the Citizens United decision that opened this flood of dark money, a lot of it coming from the carbon polluters to try to use the playbook of the tobacco industry decades ago to try to submerge the truth and put out a false set of alternative facts. But the American people are beginning to see through this, and the overwhelming majority already have.
And finally, on the whole issue.
So, I mean, I think there's a little bit of truth to what Al Gore said in that last clip, that, the Koch brothers and the mineral extraction industry has put a lot of misinformation out there. Blaming Citizens United doesn't really make much sense because that only applies to ads that air, political ads that air 60 days before an election. And the Koch brothers put out a lot of misinformation and spent a lot of money to sway people's opinions that have nothing to do with Citizens United and 60 days before an election. But the other thing that I think Al Gore missed there was the role that Christian evangelicalism plays in climate change denial, or people who believe that God gave us stewardship over the earth, and Jesus is coming soon, so we should use it up as fast as possible. That's more like the older generation. From what I understand, the younger generation of Christian evangelicals takes that stewardship gospel a little bit more in terms of our responsibility to take care of the earth rather than use it up before Jesus gets here. But it's especially telling that Al Gore used that whole turtle on a fence post story, which is, I hear that all the time from people who believe in, that the creationism, or that there's some sort of creator to the universe, that you can't see something complicated like the universe is like a turtle sitting on a fence post, that that is a quintessentially Christian argument. So maybe it's why he missed the whole evangelical aspect to climate denialism. But before I get to the topic of Russia, Covfefe, or the whole Russia scandal, I have one more climate change clip, and this is from Fox News Sunday again. There are a couple clips I didn't take from the Al Gore interview by Chris Wallace, where Al Gore actually said, Chris Wallace, you agree with me on man-made climate change being scientifically factual, and Chris Wallace didn't deny that, and maybe that's why he was harder on Scott Pruitt than he was on Al Gore. But this is one of the harder questions he asked, and it's something that I think about when I think about the climate change arguments. That I've heard a lot of claims over the years that were, that apocalyptic claims that we're 5 or 10 years away from being at the point of no return. And I've heard that, you know, I'm not that young myself, so I've heard that for several decades, that we're, you know, right at the brink of the point of no return. And that's something Al Gore said 10 years ago, which Chris Wallace kind of called him on, and he has a good answer for that, I think. Al Gore has a good answer for it. Although I noticed the quote that Chris Wallace uses on Fox News Sunday this morning has some really suspicious ellipses in it. I didn't have time to research it, but I don't know. I'm kind of suspicious whenever Fox News uses ellipses, as I will discuss with you, or I'll discuss the clip with you after we watch that final clip on the climate change issue together over here.
Pruitt, I'm going to fact check you. Okay. After your movie An Inconvenient Truth came out in 2006, you made the following comments as part of your publicity for the movie. You said, unless we took, quote, drastic measures, the world would reach a point of no return within 10 years, and you called it a true planetary emergency. We're 11 years later.
No.
Weren't you wrong?
Well, we have seen a decline in emissions for the on a global basis. For the first time, they've stabilized and started to decline. So some of the responses of the last 10 years have helped. But unfortunately and regrettably, a lot of serious damage has been done. Greenland, for example, is losing 1 cubic kilometer of ice every single day. I went down to Miami and saw fish from the ocean swimming in the streets on a sunny day. The same thing was true in Honolulu just 2 days ago, just from high tides because of the sea level rise now. We are going to suffer some of these consequences, but we can limit and avoid the most catastrophic consequences if we accelerate the pace of change that's now beginning.
Mr. Vice President, we should point out you have a sequel coming up called An Inconvenient Sequel in July, and I understand that you're going to have to rewrite the ending because of the decision the President was just made.
The directors, Bonnie Cohen and John Schenck, are putting a new segment at the very end of the movie, and I think that's appropriate.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Let's not wait another 17 years.
Deal.
Okay.
So, yeah, 17 years since Al Gore did any of these Sunday morning news analysis show interviews, and now he's out there because in July his new movie, the sequel to An Inconvenient Truth, is coming out. I look forward to watching that. You can tell me what you think about the battle between Scott Pruitt and Nikki Haley's clips and the Al Gore clips, but I obviously believe that man-made climate change is a scientific fact, and what Donald Trump is doing is going to be judged pretty harshly by the future generations. You can tell me what you think about that conclusion by clicking on this little I here and answering the poll about whether Trump will be held responsible by history for his actions on climate change this week. Like I said, that's the last clip on climate change. Now I have I think it's 6 clips on the continuing Russia scandal, the Russia Covfefe, as I said in the title, or coverage. I guess Covfefe is supposed to mean coverage. You can let me know what you think Covfefe means down in the comment section. But there was some pretty scandalous developments this week, and the first clip I want to show is actually a preview of this Megyn Kelly interview with Vladimir Putin that's airing, at least on the West Coast, at the same time I'm doing my show. I look forward to watching Megyn Kelly's premiere as an NBC journalist now that she's left Fox News, and she has a couple really good interviews. First, this Vladimir Putin interview this week. Next week, I understand she's interviewing Alex Jones, and she sort of previewed her interview with Vladimir Putin in an interview with Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press this morning, where they talked about how Putin has had these various theories just over the last 48 hours as to how Russia was involved in the hacking of the 2016 election. And you'll see it ends with a teaser clip from Megyn Kelly's interview with Vladimir Putin, where he talks about how he does not know General Michael Flynn very well, as I will discuss with you after we watch that clip together here.
Look, you had a fascinating conversation with him within the time that he's flirting on and off about whether Russians were involved or not. It was sort of a fascinating 48 hours that you spent with him.
Absolutely right. And in our time together, he changed his position yet again, Chuck, on who was responsible for the hacking of our election. All along it had been, it's not us, or I don't know what you're talking about, I haven't heard anything about this. Then it changed to maybe it was patriotic Russian hackers whom I had nothing to do with. And then in our sit down on Friday, it evolved yet again into it was the Americans, and a new conspiracy theory was floated, which you'll hear tonight on the show. But I had the chance to ask him about a range of subjects from sanctions to Syria, and then we got into some of the specifics about this alleged interference with our election. I asked him all about Jared Kushner, President Trump's son-in-law, and what connection they have had and what they have discussed. And I asked him specifically about somebody else very much in the news, and that is President Trump's now fired National Security Advisor, General Michael Flynn. Listen. He came over here for a dinner, a photo of which has been widely circulated in the American media. What was the nature of your relationship with him?
You and I personally have a much closer relationship than I had with Mr. Flynn. You and I met yesterday evening. You and I have been working together all day today, and now we're meeting again. When I came to the event for our company, Russia Today, and sat down at the table, next to me there was a gentleman sitting on one side. I made my speech. Then we talked about some other stuff, and I got up and left. And then afterwards I was told, you know, there was an American gentleman, he was involved in some things. He used to be in the security services. That's it. I didn't even really talk to him. That's the extent of my acquaintance with Mr. Flynn.
The laugh there, Megyn, that's something else. But he also kept referencing...
So, yeah, I thought that laugh was a little creepy from Vladimir Putin also. But the next clip from Megyn Kelly that I'm not going to show, where Chuck Todd asked her about Vladimir Putin's reference to her family, some people took that as some sort of sinister threat, you know, like it would be a shame if something happened to your beautiful family. But actually, in the clip I'm not going to show, Megyn Kelly talked about how previously in the 48 hours she spent with Vladimir Putin, they had talked about their families, and she's not going to, that was off the record, so she's not going to reveal the details of that, but they had like a warm exchange on their family details, and that's actually one of the problems with Megyn Kelly's interviews, is that I think she sometimes like identifies too much with her subjects. Yeah, the big interview she had with Donald Trump when she was still at Fox News after her big feud with Donald Trump during the election was kind of the same, where I don't think she was really that incisive or confrontational, and I'll be interested to see if she asks some confrontational questions, but then she just like sits there and smiles while he doesn't really answer the question, and that question, I don't think there was much of an answer there, and I guess we'll see what he says on the full program on NBC tonight, which I'm recording, and I will watch, and maybe I'll have a chance to let you know what I think. Anyway, so the next two clips are from CBS's Face the Nation, also on the Russia scandal. The first one is from Nikki Haley, but before I get to that, I have to let you know that it's quite possible CBS will be taking away my ability to live stream for the next 2 or 3 weeks. Starting on June 7th, I think they're going to send me a DMCA takedown. You can see from my right here, if I don't cancel my appeal, my fair use appeal of their claim that I violated their copyright by June 7th. This is based on my April 30th video where I took a few clips from the CBS Face the Nation interview with Donald Trump, and even though I have a strong argument, it's fair use, CBS is not responding to those arguments, and it looks like they're going to give me a copyright strike on June 7th, which is kind of a bummer because I was thinking of doing like some sort of live stream after James Comey's testimony on Thursday, and I won't be able to do any live streaming for 2 or 3 weeks, 10 to 14 business days, while I get this copyright strike and I do my immediate counter notice. But anyway, I wanted to let you know about that. But even though I'm being threatened by CBS, I still took 2 clips from CBS's Face the Nation. And this first one is John Dickerson asking Nikki Haley about why there's been no action against Russia despite all this, Russia hacking the election and all this bad behavior by Russia. And I think Nikki Haley uses a phrase, it's kind of like a Freudian slip almost. Look up, what does it mean going through the motions? That means that you're doing something without really being interested in what you're doing or being serious about what you're doing. But Nikki Haley in this next clip says that the Trump administration is just going through the motions of the Russia investigation, and John Dickerson doesn't really pick up on it let me get the right clip here. This is clip number 10 over here.
You said that it was Washington chatter about the question of Russian meddling in the elections, but since then there have been more reports about Russia trying to meddle in NATO countries. The president of Russia has talked about breaking up NATO as an objective, and yet the U.S. has taken no action against Russia. Why?
Well, I think that, they're going through the motions of the investigation. I could tell you we've taken actions against Russia in the Security Council. We've stood strong on the sanctions and their situations with Ukraine. We've called them out in their association with the Assad regime. We're going to continue to call them out as we need to. At the same time, we are trying to see if we can have talks with them on how to better come in line in the Syrian conflict. We're working with them on counterterrorism. But if we see Russia doing anything wrong, we're going to tell them. I can tell you the international community is concerned about Russia's meddling within all of their elections, but they're concerned about Russia for a lot of reasons. And so we'll continue to keep our eye on them. And when we can work with them, we want to try and do that. But when we can't, we're going to hold the line.
All right. Ambassador Nikki Haley, thanks so much for being with us.
So as you heard there, Nikki Haley says the Trump administration is just going through the motions of the Russian investigation, which John Dickerson did not pick up on or follow up on, and that's kind of sad. As an interviewer from CBS's Face the Nation, John Dickerson, the host, is usually, I think, a really good host and really good interviewer, but he just let that phrase pass by. And I want to show one more clip from CBS's Face the Nation. This is John Dickerson's interview with Susan Collins, who is the Republican senator from Maine, and in terms of Republicans who are moderate and may actually turn on Donald Trump, who may actually support impeachment of Donald Trump, Susan Collins is one of the top candidates. She's one of the most moderate Republicans, but even she seems more amenable to following some of the talking points that criticize James Comey, and John Dickerson is very willing to help her out with that in this question and answer about what she wants to ask James Comey about. She's one of the senators on the Intelligence Committee, so James Comey will be testifying before her committee on Thursday, and she wants to ask these things that kind of back up Donald Trump's version of events that John Dickerson also kind of backs up over in this clip.
But I'm so eager to question Mr. Comey is in the letter in which the president fired the former FBI director, there's a very interesting phrase in which he says, while I am very grateful that you on 3 separate occasions informed me that I was not a subject of the investigation, that phrase raises a lot of questions in my mind. Does Mr. Comey agree that that is what was said? Why would he tell the president that? What was the tone and the context of those discussions on 3 different occasions, if they in fact are accurately portrayed in this letter?
Also, Mr. Comey at one point said that in testimony, he said there was no effort to block this investigation. So how do you see squaring those 2 things?
That is one of the reasons why it's so important for us to hear from Mr. Comey before our committee, as well as other witnesses. The acting director of the FBI also said that there had not been an attempt to influence the investigation. And yet we hear of all these memos to the file, all of these dinners and meetings between President Trump and the FBI, the former FBI director. So we need to hear directly from Mr. Comey on these important issues.
In your mind, is that...
So you can hear the Republican senator, one of the most moderate Republican senators in the Senate there, still sort of taking the Trump position that James Comey has a lot to answer for on Thursday. You know, why is it that he told Donald Trump 3 times that he wasn't the subject of the investigation? Why did he testify? And it's not exactly true that he testified that there was no interference from the Trump administration on the Russia investigation. I think if you look at that Comey comment from about a month ago in context, he's really saying there was no interference from the Justice Department, not from Donald Trump himself. But John Dickerson didn't really try to cross-examine that statement. Instead, he seemed to bolster what Susan Collins was saying, and that was a little bit strange, kind of criticizing James Comey rather than Donald Trump. Maybe that's just my biased perspective, but you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I have a couple more clips here from Jake Tapper on the Russia investigation, and then one final clip from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, his new rule about how he thinks Democrats should be stronger on impeachment. But first I want to show a couple clips of the Democratic ranking member on the Senate Intelligence Committee who will be helping question James Comey at the congressional hearing on Thursday, assuming that it actually happens. And one way it might not happen is if Donald Trump tries to invoke executive privilege, but that's not very likely, and it would be a pretty weak argument, as Mark Warner explains to Jake Tapper. And then he says a few other things I want to talk about with you after we watch that clip together over here.
Big hearings coming up. On Wednesday, you'll have the Director of National Intelligence, the head of the NSA, the acting director of the FBI, and the Deputy Attorney General. And then Thursday, of course, the big one, James Comey, the former FBI director. Do you have any indication whether President Trump will try to exert executive privilege to block Comey from testifying about their conversations?
I would hope that he would not. I think he would be on shaky legal ground, to say the least. Director Comey was fired by the president, and you have the president himself making derogatory comments, in effect, at least reported to the press, calling Comey a nut job in front of the Republicans, totally inappropriate. You know, the question
in front of the Russians, I think you mean.
In front of the Russians,
yeah.
Right? Which is, again, just regardless of what you feel about Comey, that's not how he should be treated. And the question we have, and I think most Americans have, is, you know, going back to Watergate, there's a series of rules that have kind of emerged out of Washington. One, that a president shouldn't ask about an ongoing investigation, particularly shouldn't ask if that investigation is connected to affiliates of the president. And it would be absolutely unthinkable if the president of the United States asked the FBI director to basically back off an investigation that was directed at some of the affiliates of Mr. Trump.
Hillary Clinton said something.
So the problem with Mark Warner's argument at the end there about how there have been these rules developed since Watergate is those rules, they're not laws that can be broken. They're more like norms, and I've talked about the difference between laws and norms several times over the last several weeks, and Donald Trump can break all the norms he wants unless the Congress is willing to impeach him for it. And I'll talk a bit more about impeachment after I show that last clip from Bill Maher where he says the Democrats haven't been strong enough on impeachment. But before I get to that, I want to show one more clip from Senator Mark Warner. This is Jake Tapper showing him a clip from Hillary Clinton's big talk on Wednesday at the Terranea Resort. It was the Recode Conference. The Terranea Resort is actually in Rancho Palos Verdes. I grew up in Palos Verdes. This is where Marineland used to be, and one of the weird things about it is it's right next to the big Trump Los Angeles golf course, and the Terranea Resort even has this partnership with the golf course. I don't know how that happened, but they don't talk about that at all. But Hillary Clinton does talk about how she thinks that there must have been some sort of American involvement in the leaking that the Russian hackers did, and I will talk about that with you after we watch that clip together over here.
You said something very interesting this week that reminded me of something that you said in a hearing not long ago. She said that she believes that the Russians, in their interference in the U.S. election, must have been guided by Americans. Take a listen.
The Russians, in my opinion, and based on the intel and counter-intel people I've talked to,
could not have known how best to weaponize that information unless they had been guided. And here's
guided by Americans.
Guided by Americans and guided by people who had, polling and data information.
Is that true? Do you agree?
This is one of the questions we have to sort through. Again, one of the questions I was asking when I was out on the West Coast. It does seem strange. It appears that Russian paid internet trolls who created bots were then able to put forward fake news, selected stories in a way that seemed targeted. Now,
targeted at certain states?
Targeted at certain states, at certain demographics. We don't have full proof of that. So I'm not where Secretary Clinton is in terms of jumping to a conclusion. But this is one of the many questions that we need to investigate.
One of the big questions, of course, is...
So I guess that's something we can look forward to in the Senate Intelligence Committee hearings and investigation, whether there were Americans who were involved, as Hillary Clinton posits there. It sounds like Mark Warner isn't as willing to go as far as Hillary Clinton went, but I guess that's one of the things that it remains to be seen. Only time will tell, or whatever cliches that journalists use on those type of allegations, and I guess we'll find out, is what I mean to say. But before I leave the topic of the Russia scandal, and before I finish my broadcast tonight, one more clip I want to show you is Bill Maher from HBO's Real Time talking about how he thinks that Democrats should not take the high road when Republicans take the low road, and I think that's actually a big mistake. But I want to first show his argument. This is about 2.5 minutes from his new rule at the end of his program. Like the other Bill Maher clip I showed, you can see the full video for free on YouTube at a link I put down in the video description. But here's the 2.5 minute clip I picked out for you that I want to criticize after we watch it together here.
Everyone he knows has had secret meetings with the Russians and lied about it, including the National Security Advisor, the Attorney General, and the Royal Son-in-Law. They hijack the election, and he invites them into the Oval Office, gives them secret intel, admits to obstruction of justice on TV. But when asked about impeachment, Nancy Pelosi says,
what are the facts that you would make a case on? What are the rules that he may have violated? If you don't have that case, you're just participating in more hearsay.
Yo, look below you. It says Trump shared classified information with the Russian foreign minister. Would Republicans be so reserving of judgment even after Hillary was exonerated? They were chanting, "Lock her up," not "wait and see." It's one thing to bring a knife to a gunfight. The Democrats are bringing a covered dish. Adam Schiff says no one ought to rush to embrace the most extraordinary remedy that removes the president. And Eric Swalwell concurs. He says we need to assemble all the facts. Facts? Have you listened to this administration? Facts don't count anymore. They're disdained. They're pariahs. They're Charlie Sheen's dick. When they go low, we go high is a great applause line. But as a tactic, what country do you think you're living in now? Wake up and smell the asshole. Because it turns out when they go low, they get reelected. They take the Congress, the Supreme Court, the presidency. From now on, the Democratic motto should be, when they go low, we kick them in the nuts. Democrats have to start actually winning elections. I want some candidates on my team who can at least metaphorically body slam the Republicans. They put a journalist in the hospital, we put a lobbyist in the morgue.
Well, that wasn't a bad Sean Connery impression, but pretty much the rest of the argument I have to disagree with. first of all, I think if you look back on how the Republicans were all ready to impeach Bill Clinton and did impeach Bill Clinton, that did not work out well for the Republicans. Bill Clinton got more and more popular, and they got less and less popular because Republicans rushed to judgment. They didn't wait for all the facts like Nancy Pelosi was saying that she should do, or Adam Schiff was saying that Bill Clinton was criticizing. And the whole idea that, if they go low, we have to kick them in the nuts or even go lower, I don't think that's a recipe for success. I think your tactics cannot contradict your values, and if you have a value that every person deserves to be treated with respect and dignity, that's one of my basic values, I don't think you can contradict that by not treating, by doing like low down, dirty tactics that, I've been noticing on YouTube recently, a couple of my YouTube friends who are also Facebook friends, a couple of the YouTubers I've actually met in real life, Thunderfoot, Phil Mason, or Lacey Green, both one on like the anti-social justice warrior side, the other on the social justice warrior side. Both have been like disillusioned from their communities because they don't like the tactics that their communities use, because the tactics of their communities don't are in conflict with the values of the communities about treating people with respect and dignity, or believing in free speech instead of censorship, or a variety of things that can even turn off people who agree with you on a lot of issues. But if you engage in these low down dirty tactics, or you rush to judgment, or you can really lose a lot of credibility and lose a lot of support, because you're not really you're contradicting your own values with the tactics that you use to attack your enemies. And so I really disagree with that new rule from Bill Maher, and I wanted to finish the show with that. Like I said, this could be the last live stream I can do for the next 2 or 3 weeks. If I can't live stream because of this CBS Content ID claim, then I will be doing the show. I'll just record the show without a live audience, except of course for Sandy sitting over there. I didn't take it. Sandy is sitting right over there right now, so Sandy will be my only live audience for 2 or 3 weeks, and I'll just upload the show after I record it, so you still get to see it, but no live audience, no super chat contributions. I saw Daniel gave me $10 and wished me good luck with my appeal, so I appreciate those super chat contributions. This is your last chance to give one, possibly for 2 or 3 weeks. I also appreciate all of my patrons on Patreon, that you can become a patron down at a link in the video description. It also helps offset the lack of monetization from YouTube for the entire month of April and a lot of the month of May, and it's still kind of spotty at this point, so I appreciate all of you who support my videos that way. If you support my videos just by giving me a thumbs up or posting a supportive comment, I get a lot of those that I also appreciate. I may try to make that video I talked about Kathy Griffin and Bill Maher and free speech. I do have a lot of ACLU responsibilities this week and some other things going on, so I don't know if that'll be possible, but I will definitely be back next week with another edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup, picking out what I think are the best clips. I hope you enjoyed the clip selection and my comments and my criticism. And I guess until next week, I will be seeing all of you around the internet.